Okay, so if you have keyshot open, this is, I haven't done anything yet. The first thing we're going to do is import the file. So I'm going to go to File, Imports, and it's humidifier 2 is what you want to bring in here. So just go ahead and hit Open, and whatever this default is, just go ahead and hit Import. And it should bring this in. So again, this would like mimic you guys bringing in your own initial file. So the goal in project 3 is to learn by mimicry, right? So we're going to look at an existing rendering and try and match it. Hopefully the takeaway there is we can see how the object is lit by trying to match that. It gives us, again, another tool in our toolkit. And then, of course, we take those principles and transform it into a new product and apply the same render to it. So the reason I had you download the render we're matching is not only so you can see it, but actually if you go to environments, so again, just as a rough keyshot recap, what we're looking at is like the work window. Here on the left is kind of like the menu, the different options we have. Here on the right is the actual project, so what options we have applied. So we're going to go to environment, and down here where it says background, if it's hidden, you can always click on it to expand it. We're actually going to click on backplate image, and we're going to set it. It should prompt up a dialog here that says, hey, what image do you want to use? We're going to use the actual image that we want to match as our backplate image. And that does a couple things for us. One, it shows us exactly the camera view that we want to align, because we see it back in here. But two, it also gives us an opportunity to sample some of these colors directly from the image. It's a little bit more pertinent in the example that I'm doing, because it's this kind of pink-red color for some of you. I think a lot of your stuff is black and white, so it's not as hard to match the color, but this is one way to match colors. But what I'm going to ask you guys to do is to first try and align the humidifier to the image in the back. So again, navigation, the wheel zooms in and out, left click kind of tilts and pans a little bit. So just do your best to align it. This will also be a good check if you're CAD, when you do this to your own file, like how close you got your CAD to matching. It doesn't have to be perfect, but you are graded on how close you match this, so the closer you can match it, the better. It didn't load for you? Here, I can, let's see, I had to zoom better before. Just get it close. It's a little bit smaller. I'm gonna pause. Yeah, I realize, what would you call this? Screen real estate is at a premium on laptops, so having both the project and library window open can be hard, but I don't know, that's my encouraged workflow. Okay, again, just get this lined up as best you can. I feel like I had this better before I started playing with this. If you really want to like zoom in, zoom out here, let's go. If we go to the camera. So if you notice when I click with the mouse wheel, it's either too big or too small. I can see here this slider is what's changing the distance. So it's jumping from 15 to 13. You can actually type in a value here if you're trying to like really dial this in. Honestly, for this project, you don't have to be this fussy. I'm not. Why is this? Why did that just? Oh, okay. That's going the wrong way. You can also just like click and slide on this. All right. Once you have that set up, how you like it, at the top here, again, this is on camera. You want to click this little icon, Add New Camera. You can name it if you want. You don't have to. It's up to you. Most projects, if you're working with other people, it's beneficial to name it. If you're working by yourself, it doesn't matter as much. If you're unsure between the two, it's probably better to get in the habit of naming things. So I guess with that said, I would say like hero shot, or you could say like match camera, and then click this little lock icon, just so you don't have to fuss with that again. You'll notice now that it's locked, I can't move this. If that's frustrating, which it may be as we work on this, you can click back to free camera. But now anytime you want to snap back to that, if you click on this camera, it's going to snap back to that view, so it's perfectly aligned. Once you have a view that you like, you can click new camera, name it. There's a little lock on the right here. You see one is open, one is closed. All right, everyone with me or short break? Okay, so really that's the first step is bringing in the backplate image, setting up your view, your object to the right camera angle so it looks like it matches. Again, it's a good way to check your CAD. We have everything aligned. Now the next thing that we're going to do is we're going to try and like match the materials, match the look. So you'll notice here, if I go back to scene, these are our model sets. This little, and I know you guys, the majority of you know keyshot, so this is just a bit of a recap. But if you click this eyeball, it turns off all the models. If you expand this, you can turn off one part at a time. Because it came from SolidWorks, they're all called humidifier. You could take the time to rename them. I don't think it's necessary. So if we go back to our library here, if you go to materials, what we're going to do is we're first just going to drag a material over. We could hide the object real quick and look at this and make some assumptions, right? This looks like plastic. You know, it doesn't look overly glossy to me. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to go to plastic. I'm going to expand this because these options are a little overwhelming. It looks like a hard plastic to me, so I'm going to select this. And between rough, shiny, and textured, I'd say it's either rough or shiny. We can always dial this in later, though. There's a slider that allows you to slide between rough and shiny. So in my opinion, I think there's a little bit more nuance to them. But in this instance, I'm going to pick rough because it looks a little bit more matte than shiny to me. In this instance, again, the color doesn't really matter. I'm going to pick what's closest, red. And so what I'm doing is I'm clicking on this red material, holding down left click, dragging over, and letting go. And you'll notice that it applies to all the parts on here. That's because they were all the same color when we brought it in from SolidWorks, so it treats it all as the same. Okay, next thing we're going to do is edit this material to kind of match the backplate image. So what we can do, again, if you go back to camera, make sure you're on free camera so you can kind of like slide your object off to the side of it, just for now. And now if you double click on any of these parts that's red, it'll jump to the material project dialog. And you'll see the material name here, material graph. This is a little bit more advanced. We'll get into this later. Play with that. That's a newer keyshot thing. Here you can see labels, right? This is where we put the labels in. Textures. We really haven't talked a lot about textures. But properties is mainly where we're here. Like I said, there is a slider for how like rough, shiny it is. So roughness all the way down, that's the shiniest it is. You can see there's like a lot of reflection picking up off the back here. All the way to the right side is more rough. You can see like it gets more flat. It looks more evenly red. Before you start playing with this stuff, it's good to know what the number was. I did not check, but it was somewhere in the middle. Anyway, what we're going to do right now is try and match the color. This is the color here. Do you guys know the difference between diffuse and specular? Yeah. Diffuse is the main color, which should be obvious here because it's red and it's red. Specular is the color of the highlight. So if I make this really shiny and actually hold down Control and rotate my default loading screen, ain't working too much. Here we see some white back here. I believe this is the specular. So just to make a point, I'm going to double click on this. You guys don't need to do this. And pick a green. Do you see how this changes to green back here? The specular is kind of like what the highlight color is. It defaults to white. I'll be honest, I thought in the past it defaulted to a lighter shade of the color you had. But I'll be honest, I don't know for sure. Again, I think it's totally fine to just leave the default to white. It makes it look like it's being lit by a white light. Okay, so hopefully everyone's caught up here, right? So you guys all have a red kettle. So what we're going to do is try and match the color. The way we do that is we double click on the diffuse lighting. And if you click on the eyedropper tool, so it should pop up this color picker. It's just like Photoshop. You can drag this around. But what we're actually going to do is click on this eyedropper. And you'll notice now, because we have this backplate image, we can actually go and like select kind of a mid-tone. And you can see like now that they're next to each other, you can kind of like match match by eye. So like this to me looks like it needs to be a little more saturated. So I'm just going to move the slider to the right a bit. Or you can just keep like selecting with this color picker until you find something that looks about right. But honestly, to me, it just looks like it's what's the word? Not saturated enough. So once you get close, I'm moving the dot in and up a bit. Yeah. So you'll notice now though, so you can hit OK when that's done. You'll notice like we don't want all of these materials to be the same. And they all change at the same time because they're all linked. It's like the default. So you'll notice down here, if I look at this image, there's two parts that are the same. I guess, sorry, let me start that again. There's three different materials. These two are the same. It looks like the base and the wire are kind of the same. You can make an argument maybe the wire's a bit different. And then, of course, there's the window. So we're going to work on the base first. What I'm going to do is double-click on just the base. Or maybe you didn't need to double-click. But if you right-click on that, you want to say Unlink Material. If you did double-click on it, it should be the dialog here. I can test that by clicking on this picker and just like changing it to a random color. Nope, it's not. So I apologize. So, okay, once you right click on the base and say unlink material, then you want to double click on that. It should bring it up here. And now again, just to check, if we move this slider around, yeah, it changes it. So again, we're just affecting the base right now. You could do the same thing, select the picker and just try and pick a mid-tone down here. It is like kind of a darker red, is what it looks like to me. And again, you can kind of fine tune it visually once you're close. Again, this doesn't apply to all of you. I'm trying to think off the top of my head. I know Alexis has a very specific green. I think the rest of you are black and white. You have a very specific blue spot. Your blue should be easy to match, Mari. I think it's pretty much just like the royal blue. All right, so I'm getting that kind of close. And then now that I have, like I said, to me visually it looks like the wire and the base are the same. You can copy materials by holding down Shift and left click on the material you want to copy and right click on the object you want to place it to. It's a keyshot workflow thing. So Shift and left click copies a material, Shift and right click pastes the material. You have to, I believe you have to hold down Shift the whole time. So if I Control Z, again, what I'm doing is I'm holding down Shift, left clicking on the base of the material we just created, and right clicking on this here. What that does now is it actually links them. So now, again, just to show you guys, you don't have to do this, but if I just switch to some obvious color, you can see now my base and chord are now paired. Again, kind of a nice workflow thing. All right, next thing we're going to change is this window. So, same thing, you want to right click on the window and click on Unlink Material. And then you want to double click on that window. I would default, we're going to do this differently because we're going to introduce something new later. I typically would default to clear plastic. But for this one, we're going to go glass because I think it works a little bit better with this next step we're going to do. So again, let's see, if you go to your library here, you go to glass, go to basic. I think we just want basic white. You can click on that and drag it to the window and let go. Even though it's called basic white, you can see it makes it look black. That's because the inside of this object is receiving no light. Therefore, it is a window into a black space. If I make that a little more obvious, if I click on here, it tells me what the object is. If I turn this off, you can see it's a window into this like dark inside. Yeah. You're saying that it's not black for you, correct? It's like, yeah, okay, awesome, great question. I'm going to assume that if you go to lighting, that you have self shadows unchecked. So if you go to self shadows and uncheck that, it's treating self shadows is literally as advertised. Do you want the object to cast shadows on its own self, or do you want it to be treated as if its own shadows are not obscuring any part of it? There's different schools of thought. I personally like self shadows. It looks a little more realistic and accurate. Sometimes for clarity, you want to turn it off. Self shadows slows things down and it makes your rendering longer. There's more calculation. Hopefully you all remember DES 140, happy times. You have to calculate the shadow. If you don't have to do that, if the program doesn't have to do that, saves the program time. For now, you can leave it off if it makes you run faster. Just remember to turn it on before you render. But it is, if you can leave it on, it is helpful to kind of match the scene. You can see this is a little bit dark in here. Okay, so hopefully you have that all set up. The next thing we're going to do now is play with matching the lighting. So that's going to be with our environment to start off with. So we could match the camera again so that it's lined up the same way. And again, you can kind of like, if you go back to the scene, you can turn on and off your model to match. So what we're going to do now is go back to our library and go to environments. And I'm just going to use an age-old favorites. Again, maybe I should pause here. Is everyone caught up more or less? Okay. If you go over to environments, we're going to use 2 panels tilted. I believe you can just double click it and it should load. The way I'm going to check that is I'm going to click on my environment tab in my project. I'm going to double click the 2 panels. And yes, that's all you need to do. You can see it changed here. Again, reminder with your environment, if you hold down Control and left click and drag left and right with your model, you spin the environment around the objects. Now we notice some things off the bat, at least with my model, depends where you guys ended up with your slider. Suddenly with this new environment, hopefully you guys noticed that my object looks a lot more shiny than it did before. That's because the startup environment is very safe. It's kind of, there's not a lot of high contrast in the environment. The environment is really important because it's what the object reflects, okay? So in this instance, you can see that there's these hard whites next to these hard blacks. That's how we're getting this big jump right here. And let me roll back a bit. I'm sorry if you guys had trouble finding this. I used 2 panels tilted. It's under Studio and Panels. So again, there's no really right or wrong way. That's just kind of what I default to. But that's why we're getting these reflections in here. So obviously we're noticing this looks a little bit too shiny maybe, so we can double click on our materials here. So if you double click on like this upper portion, that's right because my roughness was turned all the way down to show the specular. If I turn this up, you'll notice that this like sharp reflection here, like we can actually see what the environment looks like. As I turn the roughness up, you can see that that fades into more gentle of these like kind of long highlights. So again, I would argue that you kind of want your object to be exactly where it belongs as you're matching the lighting, but you can turn this on and off to look, right? And so if you guys all want to look up for a minute at what I have, as I turn this on and off, you can see it's actually pretty close, right? We want, if I turn this off, we want a nice big highlight running down here. If I turn my object back on, I do have a highlight here. It's not quite as pronounced. It's a little bit too far to the right. And then this highlight on my left, it's a little bit, it's a little too pronounced here on the left, because if I turn this off, you can see that this is a little bit more muted. It's kind of blended together, whereas here it's like a little bit separated. So the first thing I'm going to do is hold down Control and just rotate my environment to the, drag it to the right a little bit to get this highlight located a bit better. What that did also is it blended this highlight on the left here. Another way you can do that is you can actually dial in the rotation under the environment tab here by typing it in or by dragging this wheel if you want to get your highlight low light dialed in. So I would recommend getting that close. Again, my material, if you want to match what I have, let's see, I have roughness set on this upper portion to 0.0627. If I look at my base, it's not quite, the highlights and lowlights are not quite in the same location, but it's kind of close. If I look at the chord looks like it has, I mean, if I turn my object off and just look at this, there are some white highlights picking up on this edge. That's why you want to fillet your part lines. That's how you get that really nice detail right there in this person's rendering. If we look at this, you can see there's a little more matte finish. So again, for the sake of accuracy, you guys don't have to do this again. I'm not too worried about, well, honestly, for best practice, let's do this. If you go to your chord, let's right click on this and say unlink material. And then again, double click on that chord. It will bring up its material properties and just drag that roughness up a bit. I would drag it to like 0.15 maybe. It's a pretty matte chord. You want it to look a bit like rubber. I don't know, maybe even 0.2 is where I ended up with mine. But the base, again, if I'm judging and trying to match, and I look at the original, this base has these white highlights here, and that tells me it's a little bit more reflective than the chord. And I want to leave that in there. So like at this stage in the process with your guys' own files, it's a little bit of this back and forth. You change the environment to match the scene. Once you have the lighting how you kind of want it, or at least close, you then go back and modify the materials so they reflect that lighting in the way you want. And then you go back and start to mess with the lighting and really just kind of dial it in. I'll give you guys a minute to kind of mess with it. If you double click on your this upper and bottom pink portion, my roughness was set to 0627. Okay. If you guys want to match my color, you can always type in a hex here, which I learned from Alexis earlier in class. Thank you, Alexis. I have mine set to EF7566. But honestly, for the sake of this demo, please don't worry. If you, for whatever reason you're having trouble with color, you can match. So happy little reminder here, but that is good. We want to save this, right? File, save as, or save. I'll call this render 3. Because now we're pretty close. We're also about to start messing with the lighting, so like in case we absolutely mess it up, we can always revert back. Okay, so assuming everyone has something close here, again, if I go back to scene and I turn on and off my files, I can see that, again, this highlight is a little bit brighter on this edge. This is a little bit more muted on the left edge. It's a little dark in the middle. You know, this is a little more narrow. We're trying to get this close. So we're going to go back to environment here. And here we're going to go to HDRI editor. Now, there's a couple things we can do. So let's say we want to add this highlight on this face here. We could, let's see what's the best way to maybe start on this. One way to do this is to click on this target, and what that does is it begins the set highlight dialog, and you'll see here this little pop-up happens on the bottom. It says Control plus left mouse button to add highlight. So I can hit Control. I want a brighter highlight on this face. So I can hit Control and click like just above the window, and you can see that highlight popped up a lot brighter. What it did is it dropped a pin here on the right. So again, if you guys want to do that, you could. So to repeat what I just did, in environment, you go here, you click on the target. It opens up this dialog. Hold down Control and left mouse click wherever you want to highlight on your product. It is possible if you like this method of the Control and set the highlights where you want them, you could start with a background, an environment that's either all black or just like a black to gray gradient and just do your lighting one at a time. I'm kind of showing you guys more of my workflow, which is like I try and get it close with a environment to begin with and then drop in the highlights as I need. All right, when you're done with that, or happy with that, you can hit done. You'll notice there's a pin that's added here. If you're not happy with it, you can always turn it off or delete it by checking this checkbox. So if you click on the target, there's done down here. I'll forget and leave this up sometimes and go to drag my model, and suddenly I've dragged the light all the way across. So that's why that's important. There is a little bit of like back and forth of like turning this on and off to see if you have it matched, or you could have the render open in a window to the right. But this still doesn't quite match. I'm still not entirely happy with this. The left side is still a little too bright in my opinion. So the other thing I want to show you guys is, again, we're still in the HDRI editor. If we expand this box, or this folder here where it says rectangular pins, this has all of the pins that are in the, what's it called, in the scene already, right? If I uncheck all of these, now suddenly we're just left with that highlight that we added. But the cool thing is we can edit each of these. So for example, and they're labeled, which is nice. So there's the floor reflection and the overhead. If I turn off the left overhead, you can see that this whole left side gets dark. And again, if I just quickly show you guys what I'm looking at, when I turn off my model, look at this highlight here. When I turn my model off, it looks a little bit darker in the one I'm trying to match. Again, we're going for as much accuracy as we can get. So back to this environment here, we can take this overhead light, and if I click on this, there's some settings down here, such as brightness, so I can actually literally just dial this down till it looks about close to the render. Now, full disclaimer, the chances that you guys will have to match your rendering exactly is not a skill you necessarily need. Sometimes it's useful if you're trying to work on a team and match someone else's style. That's where this is useful. This is more a tool the matching the render is more of an educational tool to, again, just learn how to use keyshot. And hopefully by studying renders, you know, from our discussion last week of like products, we like how they look, we like how they're rendered. By studying how that's done, you can now match that. So for example, I could possibly, my takeaway from this, like if I was learning this new style, is I could say, hey, you know what, maybe next time I use two panels, I'm just going to take one of the panels and just knock the brightness down a bit because I think that looks a little bit better. It gives it makes it a little less even and adds a little more interest to it. Just like we knocked this down a bit, I realized I showed you guys how to add a pin. You could always uncheck that. You could take this other overhead light here, and you could do the opposite. You could knock the brightness way up to get that to match. Another thing you could do, this is a little less recommended, but totally possible, is you could actually go up here into this little window where you see what your scene looks like, and you can actually drag these around. So let's see, I want this to move to the left a little bit. If I drag to the right, it goes the wrong way. So if I drag to the left, it goes the wrong way. If I drag to the right in the window, it goes the right way. I can also drag it down a bit if I want that highlight to come all the way down. So here's another way you can kind of like really dial in where your lighting is. Okay, you're off. Okay, for any of you that are having trouble matching what I have, well, the first thing I want to show you is that if you need to pass a keyshot package to anyone, you could always hit save and copy the file, but if you save the package, what that does is any labels or stuff get packaged into like a keyshot type zip file. But now that I think about it, there are no labels, although there is material and there is the HDRI. So let me do this. As you mess with your HDRI editor, I don't know how important this is. Okay, I think it saves it. I don't think you need to save the library. I'm just going to click away here. I'm going to file, save my file. And then for anyone who needs to be caught up, I'm going to copy this onto Box. Yep. All right, so again, we're playing with the HDRI editor. I was just dragging around this rectangular piece to get the highlight where we wanted. Again, I can turn on and off my bodies to get to see how this looks. This is pretty close. If I look, again, if I'm looking at a critical eye between this bright highlight and this low light on the left, the low light in the middle, the kind of core shadow, is really dark, or sorry, really narrow compared to the original. If I go back to my environment, HDRI editor, there is a way to deal with that. Again, I select the correct one. It's this lower one on the right here. You'll notice there's a size here. So we can try and play with that. And I want it to be more narrow. So it's the X value. I can drag this lower to make the highlight more narrow. This is my best guess. You see this shape that's in here? So I'm going to remember this. It's 35. I'm going to drag this all the way down. Do you see how that shape became a slit now? That's all that is changing. It's like, no, that's fine. That's a good question. I appreciate questions. It's, yeah, geometry. X is always left, right. Y is always up, down. Z is always front, back. Yay, math. Okay. So my advice, guys, for project 3, get as accurate as you can. Don't pull your hair out. I'm not looking to stress you guys out, but just do your best to get as accurate as you can. Okay. Hopefully, using these techniques makes your life a little bit easier. The other nice thing is you'll notice by trying to dial in the highlight here, now if we look at our glass, it's like half white, half black. It's very reflective, shiny. If we turn this off, actually this is pretty smooth. It's a little bit more of a gradient, but you'll notice it has the exact same effect. Black on the right, shiny on white on the left, same thing. You could double click the glass. Let's see, there is, because it's glass, there is no roughness slider. I think if it's clear plastic, there is. We're going to leave it because, again, I want to show you guys a kind of a new thing, and I think it works better with glass. You can play with it with plastic after. So anyway, I'm hoping everyone has something similar to this. And again, all we did, if I just verbally talk through our steps, we brought in a backplate image that's the render we want to match. We oriented our product the same way. We saved that camera. We then used a color selector to match the material colors. We then used an environment to get our lighting close. We then dialed in the material properties to kind of get it looking right in the lighting. We then went back to the lighting and dialed in where our highlights were. Let's see. I'm saving my file. If you're Scott, don't save your file. Honestly, at this point, well, let me think. Now is when I would come in and do the details. So if I turn this off, you'll notice we're missing. So I mean, if I'm being a little more critical, like you can see my window's a bit bigger. It's a difference in my CAD. It could be, and you could play with that. Yeah, let's see if we go to free camera here. Yeah, like, oh wow, that's super weird. You could play with that a bit. I think like 35, between 35 and 50 is pretty standard. You know, if you play with the camera, you can always save a new one. You can always like click back and forth between the two. It does look like 35 matches, maybe a bit better. I'm going to leave mine at 50 though, with the first match one, because that's what I was setting all my lighting to. So actually, ideally, yeah, you would do that before you mess with your lighting and stuff. Okay, but now we're going to look at some details. So you'll notice here, firstly, there's two labels. These two little like high and low for the water. And then there's some like droplets on the inside here. And that's probably going to be the most challenging thing to match today. So the first thing, we're just going to do a quick recap on labels. So if you go back to camera, I would be on free camera. Because the labels are on the back here, again, this is just like best practice, I would switch to an orthographic view. And then under standard views, I would hit this drop-down menu and click on back. If for whatever reason the backplate image is distracting, you can always turn it off. I would leave it on for now because we're going to want to check it. But if you go back to environment, you can always set this backplate to a color temporarily. I think if we click back here, it loads it again. So if it's distracting, you can always turn that off for a minute. Okay, so now we have a camera looking at the back orthographic. We're going to double click on the glass. It's going to load the material, and then we're going to go over the labels. And now we're going to click on add label, and we want to add label texture. So again, this is this little plus icon here. Click on that, click on add label. It's going to bring up a dialog to say, hey, what label do you want to add? Hopefully all your files are in the same place. But this is one of the files I gave you guys. It's called graphic line. You want to double click on that. And so now it's going to bring up this placement dialog. If it's anything like mine, Right now, I can tell because I see these 2 yellow dots in here that the label's facing up. You want to just, on this like box on the bottom here, you want to click on Z. And hopefully that lets you see an orange box, which is the like kind of the bounding box of the shape. You'll notice it's like vertical. We want this horizontal. You can do this one of 2 ways. You can either click and drag it and visually align it, or on the right here under label where it says angle, you can type in 90, which is what I'm going to do. Now that we have the rotation set, you don't want to accidentally rotate this label. So I'm going to uncheck this rotate box down here in this like pop-up dialog. And you'll notice that turns off these green icons so that I don't accidentally select them. So again, I went to double clicked on the material, clicked on the plus sign, picked the label called graphic line. This little window popped up down here. I clicked on Z because that's the axis I want it to be perpendicular to, right? Z is front back. I then rotated it at 90 by going to the project window, scrolling down to size and mapping and typing in 90 for angle. And then I went back to this place position dialog box and unchecked rotate. Now I have these 2 arrows. I can drag them to where I want it to be. It looks like from my memory from the image that it's like a little bit at the top where the curve starts to happen. If I mouse wheel in, you'll notice it's like a little bit too big. So the size here, I can type in the DPI. If you make this DPI bigger, it makes the graphic smaller. So I'm setting mine to maybe like 550. Let's see how that looks. That looks pretty good. Once that's done, you can click check. And now we have a label in there. I'll be honest, I don't know if there's a way to change label color. I should look that up. I swear there was, but I don't remember off the top of my head. I tried to match. When I made this label, I just tried to match the color. All right, does everyone have a label placed? Okay, we're going to do it again for the bottom. If you're having trouble getting your label placed, as long as you get one in there, just get the practice in, that's fine. But anyway, we're going to do the process exactly again. So I'm going to go, click the plus sign, click on add label, double click graphic line. If for some reason you're like me and your position dialog box just disappeared, make sure you're selecting the right graphic line. You can do that by unchecking the other one and making sure it turns off. But if your location dialog disappeared, if you're highlighting the right label, you can click on move texture, which is down here, and it should pop up this box again at the bottom. And then again, same exact steps. We're going to hit Z. We're going to go down here and we're going to type in 90. We're going to go back here and uncheck rotate. We're now just going to drag this all the way down until it's about where we want it, because it defaults centered, left, right, centered. Then the size, if I recall correctly, I think we had it set at 550 DPI. Then we're going to click check. We're going to turn our first label on. And looks like they're about right to me. Once again, we can go back here, reset our camera. Let's see here. Okay. Okay, a bit of a workaround here, guys, unfortunately. Because we have glass, the two-sidedness, you're noticing there's a double label. We only want it on the outside. Normally, and here I'll show you guys how to fix this. There might be a bit of a rough fix. If I uncheck two-sided, you'll notice the label disappears. It looks like it's still on the inside though. So I think what ended up happening, and I don't know tell you how this happened, but I'll show you guys. If I select only my glass and turn everything else off, so we can look at just the glass, and I spin this around or go back to my free camera. Yeah. Somehow I managed to place my labels on the inside of the object, not on the outside. However, if I spin this around, it looks like it's refracting. It's still refracting back. Okay, I'm gonna try a different workaround that hopefully is a bit quicker and maybe a new useful tool. Let's see, if you double click on your material and you go to labels, it should be under size and mapping, and it should say two-sided, not two-sided. I'll talk to you what I'm doing in a minute. I'm just playing around to see if I... There we go. Okay. Yeah, okay. So I did the next test with glass. It should work with this. Okay. All right. If there's ever a time that you guys, let's say you went through all the trouble to apply your labels, but you wanted to change the material. So let's say you're rendering that stag kettle we talked about. You have this, I guess there were no logos on it, but hypothetically, let's imagine there's all these labels on it, and you want to change it from a black kettle to a stainless steel kettle. So in this instance, right, I have glass. It's refracting not quite how I wanted it to. You know what? Actually, it's okay now that I look at it. But whatever. To continue with this. No, this says clear, shiny white plastic, so I did successfully change it. Let's say you have all the labels placed, you want to change material. If you click on the material, so let's say I want this to be green, but I want my labels to stay. I click and drag the material. If I hold down Control, you'll notice it actually tells me at the top, hold Alt to retain textures or Control to retain labels. I'm holding down Control, I let go. It wants to match, just say no. But you'll notice it kept the labels. If I don't do that and just drag the screen over and let go, the labels disappeared. See that? So anytime you update material, if you want to keep a label, just hold the Control hotkey down. So anyway, to show you guys why I'm teaching you this is, if I do the same thing here, glass has a property that mirrors, it refracts the label to the back. I don't want that. Honestly, for the sake of the demo, if you don't want to fuss with this, don't worry about it. You can leave whatever you have now with the glass and the label and the two-sided, that's okay. If this is your project and you're trying to match it, this would be the fix, and I'm going to try and fix it on mine. I'm going to pick plastic so it's not as refractive, or let's see if we can change the refractive material in the glass. Let's try that first. Can I turn this way down? No, that did not change anything. So I'm going to hit Control Z. So oh, really? I don't. Where are you seeing the clear setting for the glass? I don't know if we have the same glass material. Okay, interesting. You did something slightly different than what I did. I'll show you what you did here. Let's see if I can match it, and maybe that's another workaround. Guys, just like any program, one of the hard things is there's a million different paths to the same end result. So here, I think you had, it looks to me that you went here and you set this to glass. No? You dragged it? Oh, wait, you have more settings than I do. Oh, glass leading grid. Okay. Let's see that. Let me see what settings are there. Oh, you just clicked on this. Oops. Oh yeah, it does have different settings. See, this one has a bump map though. I guess we could turn that off. I don't know. That's interesting. I'll be honest, that level of nuance with keyshot, I'm not entirely sure how they make those decisions. Like, why does this glass have a transparency distance and the other one not? So that's one workaround. You could set it to wavy glass and turn the bump map off. Again, one of my workarounds, I was going to go to clear plastic and click on shiny and apply this one. But of course now my labels are on the wrong side. So I think I would have to do this process again, which, go back to orthographic, go back to fronts. That would work. No, we want back, sorry. Let's see if we can replace this label. So again, if you guys are trying to fix this, let's say you have a label on the wrong side. Again, I just want to translate, I don't want to rotate. Again, if I double click on this, you can see this label's in the wrong place back here. I can find which label it is by turning it on and off. If I click on this and click on move texture and just click on this front face with the two-sided unchecked, it should bring it to the front. So, okay, this was a big tangent that I didn't plan, but hopefully it's good. It shows you some troubleshooting if you need to move your labels, play with your material settings. All right, does everyone have something kind of like this? Turn everything on and off by just turning the eyeball off and then back on again. And now this looks a little bit more correct. We have one label, not two. Everything looks all right here. Okay, the next step we're about to move into is the droplets. Do you guys want a short break before we get into that? Because we've been doing a lot of talking, and honestly, at this point, it's kind of close. Or do you want me to just keep on going? Keep going. That's what it seems like. Okay, cool. Okay, there's a couple ways to do the droplets. I'll show you a new way, which I think is interesting and gives you a little bit deeper knowledge of keyshot. I'll be honest with you guys, the old school way that I would do this personally is I would do the droplets as a label. Again, different paths to the same end goal. I don't think I gave you guys the droplets. Oh, I did. Yeah, .png. You guys don't need to follow along here. I'm just going to do it kind of quick. But it would be all the exact same process. Looking at the back view, double click on this glass, go to labels, add label. The droplets I created, I just Googled image search droplets. You can see this is the original. I selected some of it out. It's a PNG so that it's only droplets and area around the droplets is transparent. You can look at that file in Photoshop later if you're interested. But it's all the same stuff. The move texture. It looks like it is actually oriented the right way this time. The droplets look gigantic, so I can always change this DPI to be a lot smaller. 30. Right? That's close enough to what I wanted to show you guys. Now I can go back and load my camera again. I don't know, droplets could probably be better, but that's a workaround, right? It's actually using the image as part of your rendering. Another thing is, it's like the equivalent to photoshopping it in after. Okay, but you guys already know labels. So in fact, I'm going to turn that off. Again, I feel like that's a more like old school, lazy way, maybe not as robust. So we're going to get a little bit now into material graphs. And the way that I would recommend doing this, so in our scene here, what we're going to first do is we're going to go edit and we're going to add geometry. I had mentioned before that I was sure there was a way in Keyshot to add stuff. I finally found it. It's up here under edit. And if you go to add geometry, you'll see that there's cube, cylinder, disk open, so on and so forth. We're just going to add a cube. It drops it down here by the base. I'm going to drag this up into the left, just so it's like kind of out of the way, but so I can see it. Doesn't really matter where it ends up. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this cube and I'm going to match its material to this window. So here I'm going to left click on the window and right click on the cube. And now they're the same. And hopefully it'll be clear in a minute why we did that. It's just so that we can see what changes we're making to this window a little bit more clearly in this like floating image here. So now we're going to double click on the glass material again, or whatever you ended up using, wavy glass. Again, I ended up using shiny plastic, clear plastic. And what we're going to now play with is this material graph. So again, double click on your window material and click on material graph. And you'll see this is probably going to look different to everyone based on what you have, whether you have glass, whether you have plastic. Glass, it's a little bit more simple. Plastic has a little bit more stuff going on. Of course, the two labels are shown on here. But what we're going to do, so the way that this works, keyshot, this is, as far as I know, this is like a relatively new feature in keyshot. Is anyone familiar with this dialog? Is this new to everybody? You've used it? Other render programs use this same kind of flowchart to show the stacking of information that's going into the material. So on the far right here, we have the material. As we go to the left, we have all of these different things that are impacting it. So we have like a transparent effect on the surface. You can see this label is turned off. That's that dotted line. These two labels are turned on. But what we're going to do, we're going to add another box here. So I'm going to right click on here. So right click anywhere in this light gray area and go to geometry and click on bubbles. And now, if you click on this white box here, or this white circle rather, and drag it to where it says geometry on material here and let go, we have now applied bubbles to our geometry. Now the reason why we did this cube here is sometimes the bubbles aren't visible in this window, and well, by having a cube match here, we can kind of see the settings. But right now I don't see bubbles in either of them. So what we're going to do is we're going to double click on this, and it's going to bring up a bubbles property dialog box. And really at this point it's a bit of playing. We slide with these settings here until we see some bubbles here. So at first the thing I'm going to do is let's see, I'm going to really just pump up the density and then click on execute geometry node. So again, if you're following along, I set the density to 5 and then I clicked on like update essentially, and now we can see bubbles in our cube here. To add the bubbles, I right clicked in this gray area here. And then I went to geometry. There's like several options and I went to bubbles. You can see there's like flakes, I don't know, other stuff. This is, this should be keyshot 8, no? Wait, so you're currently in 7? Gotcha. This is not critical. You guys can totally, this is like slightly more advanced stuff. I'll be honest, this is kind of new to me. I was just playing around with it. It's an awesome feature. So, I mean, I'm going to click out of here to show you. Yeah, it's under material graph. So if you're on the material, you should see an icon here. Again, I'm fairly certain this is new to keyshot 8. And again, this kind of like flowchart is standard among what's the word? Other render programs. Now I'll be honest, my bubbles are all the way to the right here, which I had to like fish that to get that out. I don't know how that happened. Hopefully that doesn't happen to you guys. But again, to edit it, you double click the bubbles and it brings up this property dialog box on the right. So anyway, I just dialed up the density. You can see how dense it is in the cube, but how sparse it is in the window. That's again why we created the cube, just so we can see the changes we're making. Again, right, we want a little bit more bubbles than that. I mean, the bubbles are really, The keyshot is putting bubbles in the material, but I'm using bubbles to represent droplets of water on the glass. It's my workaround, I don't know. But again, we can pump that density up a bit. So I was at 5, let's go to 5.5 and hit refresh. There's like a couple more here. You can play with all these settings. Maybe we want the size just a little bit bigger, the size variation a little bit less. I don't know. That does it. It's all right. You can survive without this. Seed, I believe, is where it starts. So, like, I think if you move this, it moves the bubbles around. It's like a randomizer. Full disclosure, that's a total guess on what seed means and also just by what it does when it moves. Gotcha. 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 And does it have the same terminology for seed? Yeah. Um, Here, let's just really crank this up and see what happens. 7. Yeah, I'll be honest. I can't also speak to why the cube and the window look as different as they do. Yeah, absolutely. I do think it has to do with their volume. Maybe if we decrease the size of the bubbles, take this down to 3, and see if it's like, yeah, that seemed to help. Now there's more bubbles here. So maybe because the window's so flat, larger bubbles don't, what's the word, don't generate. So anyway, that's a way to add droplets. Get something that looks kind of close. If you want to copy my settings, I have my size at 0.03, size variation at 0.9, density at 7, seed at 121. And when you're done, you can click out of that. This cube, you can delete it or hide it. All right, so now I'm going to go back to my environment and just check with the backplate image and just turn those on and off. And hopefully we can see, right, it's pretty similar. Again, learning by mimicry, we can learn like how to, maybe it's nice to have one bright highlight, one darker highlight, coarse shadow in the middle. This is kind of a nice way to render a cylinder. Now we also have a nice rendering setup for when I bring in a new model. I could extrapolate this and say that, let's say you find a render that you really like how it looks. You could do this process to match it and then just have a default render scene to drop your concepts and projects into from other classes. It's like, I would assume this lighting setup should work pretty well for other stuff. Really at this stage, one last thing to do, right? We want to match the background. So here I'm going to go to environments, click on color here. So again, I encourage you guys to follow along. And then on color, double click the white. Same thing, have the picker here. And in this instance, I'm going to pick like a highlighted section on my product and match this. And now we have a render that looks pretty close. Again, for this project in this class at this stage, I would hit render. Reminder to set where you want this to go because the default is buried in your keyshot files. So I just often click here and just whatever, click desktop, or if you have a project folder, you can click on that. Select folder. Now the settings, again, think about you're printing this out for this project. If you're printing on 8.5 by 11, you could totally type that in here, right? You could say 11 width at 300 dpi. Again, options here, you can set like maximum time. I don't encourage that. I just advise you to leave it at the defaults. Samples is like the number of passes it does, I think. 35 is the default. If you take that down, it'll render a bit quicker. If your computer is pretty quick, it should be fine. Once that's set, you can just hit render. It brings us up. We haven't talked about this actually. I don't think I've rendered anything in class. Let's see. This should only take like a minute or two. Oh, does it not do it anymore? I'm gonna zoom out. Okay, keyshot's changed. It used to have these like little orange boxes that would walk around. And what that was is you got, for each core of your computer, you got a little orange box. And that core was processing, calculating what that box looks like, and would just like march its way around the screen. Yeah, it's an older version of keyshot. So it's not doing it anymore here. I believe rendering speed is a factor of two things on your computer. It's the number of processors or cores that you have in your motherboard or your processor chip, right? So I think standard these days is like 8. If your computer's a little older, it's maybe like 4. And then your video card, I think, helps with processing. All right, any questions on anything? So really, that's the process you guys are doing next for your project is, I mean, like I'll walk around and take a look at all of your CAD files. Like they should be done today for credit. If you have any questions or refinements, I'm happy to give you feedback. Or if I see any refinements that I think it needs to match. But then you are then welcome to start this process on your own. In fact, I would encourage you to do. Homework for next week is once you have this set up, this is again really only half the battle. Again, hopefully it's not too hard, but you want to take your CAD file and modify it, transform it in some way into a new product, and then put it into the same render. So again, we learned by mimicry, but then we're now using our study of mimicry, the form, the lighting, the render, to pretend like we're designing a new object. We're taking inspiration in this instance from a cylinder, transforming it from a humidifier maybe to an electric kettle. So there is still, you're kind of doing this process again. If you set up your master sketch well, and you planned ahead for your changes, or you know what you want to change, it should be a pretty easy step, this next process. Okay, so this rendered, really again, that's the first step of the process. We would print this out. I will grade you on looking at your matched rendering, or the render you want to match, and the new render you created. If we now look at my 2 files side by side, here's the render we just output. I just output, and the original here by Mr. Chris Daniels, studying his work. You can see, okay, my render's a little bit brighter, but the highlights are roughly in the same place. They roughly match. You know, the window's a different size, but it can get you pretty close. Any questions on anything? Okay. Same offer for a break if you guys want it, but we're going to play just a little bit more in keyshot with some new features. How's everyone feeling? Keep going? Okay. Cool. So I can't click anywhere right now. That's because the render window is still open. So you just close that. That happens. That's why. Close this dialog. Save it. Okay. A couple new features. So this is now beyond what you guys need to do for this project. I just want to show you guys 2 new things. One of them is cutaway views, and one of them is adding like smoke and fire and stuff. Again, this is just kind of like a light touch on these new features. So I'm going to go back to my free camera here. At this stage, you guys are welcome to follow along or just watch. It's up to you. So what I'm going to do, and I think on project 4, I'll make a cutaway a requirement. Not I think, I will. So this is kind of a preview of where we're going. But anyway, if you go here, you go to Edit, Add Geometry, and I'm going to add a cube again. I guess you could use this old cube if you wanted. But now with this cube, if you click on this, or double click on it rather, there is another way to change material settings. And that's in this drop-down box here where it says Type. If you look at the bottom, it says Special. And you'll see one of them says Cutaway. If you click on this, what it does is now the cube becomes an eraser. And whatever the cube is overlapping with gets cut in keyshot. It's a pretty simple function. If I go to my cube now here and change the scale to be bigger, you see I cut more away. If I go to the move tool, and again, if I want a more traditional cutaway view, I can drag this to be half, like kind of in the middle, and drag this up. And again, maybe we want it bigger because we want to cut the whole object in half. Or, you know, if I was happy with where that size was, I just want it to be taller, I can scale the cube up so the cube can become a rectangle. You'll notice though, and now I'm going to click the check mark. You'll notice though that when I built this in CAD, now if I spin this around, I did not plan to make a cutaway view, so it's kind of messy on the inside here. Okay, let's look at some settings now. If we go back to our, click on our cube here, and go to material, again, you'll see it says cutaway. So caps, that's the name given to like these surfaces here. If you go to color, I'll be honest, I don't know what this means. It says for the best results, objects being cut should be closed surfaces. You know, in SolidWorks, it is a closed surface. I don't know. I'll have to look more into that, to be honest. But it still works. Keyshot's smart. So here you can change the color of like what you want your cutaway wall to be. I believe, yes, if you make it a material, you could add a texture to it. So for example, if you had a PNG, let's see if this works. This should work. Right? Like now I have droplets on here. If you had a PNG that was stripes, you could have like a hash pattern on there, a line pattern. That's how you would do that. But anyway, I'm just going to go with, whoops. Okay, I'm a little confused now. Let me go back to my cube. The material, why is it now diffused? It should be cut away. I'll be honest, I'm not entirely sure what just happened there. Here we go. That honestly seemed like a bug to me. I don't know why that changed. Anyway, you can set the color. That's one way. So now let's say you want to show there's some guts in here, right? Maybe there's like a heating coil or something, and I want to show what that full coil looks like. You can exclude objects here by clicking the plus mark, and it brings up this dialog box. Let's say, for the sake of this example, I want to select the. Can I select out here? Yes, I can. So I could click on the window here, and I could click on OK, and it adds it to this list, and now we see the whole window. It's not cut away. So like if you have an interior like heating coil or something, you want to show what that whole thing looks like, then you can exclude it. And that's cutaways. Any questions on that?
So that would I see some cutaways sometimes where it's like if you had like a microwave, it might just cut away like a corner.
Sure.
But like there's still like some parts that are like fully there.
Yeah.
So that would assist with that.
Correct. You could exclude some stuff. Again, as far as I know, this is relatively new to Keyshot 8. Old school way to do this, we used to do a cut command in SolidWorks and bring in a cut object cut in half and render that. So I'm glad that they have this. That's really nice. You turn the cutaway view off by just hiding the cube. Any questions on that? They're useful. It depends. Like, yeah, anytime you want to show what's going on the inside, you can show it for moldability, like to show how. They tend to happen, I think, further down the road with when you're like dialing in. So meaning to say, when you have the part line physically built, like honestly, like you can see for this, it was just all like we talked about, fillets and edges. But if you actually have that like part line built in, you can show how the part comes together. Engineers like to see that. You'll use a cutaway view to show like the guts, the components in there. If you remind me after this, I can show you. I think I have a cutaway view in my portfolio. I can show it to you and why we used it, why I use it. We'll use it in Project 4 because in Project 4 I want you guys to design an object around internal guts. and we'll get to that. Okay, last new thing I'm going to show you guys is how to do like smoke, fire stuff. Again, old school way that used to be done is with Photoshop. At least that's how I used to do it. Maybe smarter people knew smarter ways how to do it. But fancy new keyshot 8 has a way to do it. So again, it starts the same way. Edit, add new geometry. I'm just going to add another cube. Now this one, when it comes in, let's say I want, this is a humidifier, so I want a little bit of smoke up by the front here. Again, I can click and rotate the scene around. Maybe I want the cube to be a bit bigger so that my smoke exists within a slightly bigger space in front of here. And then when that's positioned roughly where I want it, I'm going to click the check mark. Now I'm going to double click on that cube. And just like before here where it says diffuse, before we went to cutaway. So again, I'm kind of showing you guys a different way to edit materials. You could, let's see, where is it here? You could go to scattering medium and drag these over. I'll explain why in a minute, why I'm showing you guys this other way. It seems to work better the other way for me. I don't have a good answer why you would do one over the other, I'll be honest. In general, I think it's best to copy from the library, but I think when you're doing these like special settings like cutaway and like fog, it seems to work better for me going this other way. So over here where it goes to, it says diffuse, you want to go down and look for scattering medium. It's under advanced. So we're going to click on that. And the cube should turn to this kind of like fuzzy look. Now the way you get your fog to be a certain shape is under textures, you want to load a density texture. I did a little bit of digging into this and we can do a deep dive, but for now, if you click this checkbox, it wants you to load a .vdb file. And again, this is that file I had you guys download called wdascloud.vdb. And click open. And you'll notice now it looks like a pretty little fart. That is a default VDB that comes with keyshot. And again, we can do a deep dive into how to make your own VDB. I did not fully explore it myself, but I can at least point you guys in the right direction if something you're interested in. As far as I'm concerned, it's not necessary for this class. It's just a fun new thing to learn. I didn't make this VDB. I'll show you. Yeah, there is. Okay, there's a program. I believe it's literally called OpenVDB, and it's free. And I haven't played with it, but apparently it's really easy. I'll be honest. Yeah, I didn't do too deep a dive. This is the default. I literally I was like, when I was playing around with this, I was like, Keyshot has to come with VDB files. It's like seems silly that it wouldn't. It comes just with this one. So if you double click on this, you can change the color. Over here in transmission, you can change it to like, kind of white. And I don't know, same thing. All the settings are in here. Keyshot works pretty similarly. But now if we go back to our camera and set this up, you maybe want to like, you can play with this where you want it. Again, if you change the scale, it changes the size. No, it doesn't. If you double click on this and you go to the texture, this is where you would change the scale. But it only gets to the size of the cube, and then I think the edge cuts it off, I believe. But you can play with the size of your cloud. You can move dialog box here, right, to get that puff where you want it. And now you can render it, and now we just improve the rendering a little bit. It's a humidifier, there's a bit of puff or something. Any questions on that? Okay. I'm not going to show you guys, but for what it's worth, just like edit, add geometry, maybe you want a sphere. This is how you might put like a light in an object. I guess I said I wouldn't show you guys, but I will. So I think that sphere is roughly on the inside. If I go to material, same thing here, I could go to emissive. Nope, I'm still on the cube apparently. Oh, were they matching? I don't know. Anyway, I'm going to turn this cube off. Click on the sphere. Let's see, if that doesn't work, you can always hide this. And I can go here and I can find a light, maybe like an area light, drag this over onto this sphere. Well, let's see, is there maybe a point light? Makes more sense. There you go, point light, because that makes the object disappear. And then now when I turn this on, now it looks like there's a light on the inside. So that would have been good for the microwave project. So sorry for not showing you that. Okay, let's just do a quick back to this emissive. Again, it's the VDB file is what we want, or not emissive. We had this set to scattering. Again, texture is this VDB file. So if you go here, yeah, here we go, open VDB. Again, I didn't explore too much into this, but apparently it's free. I was hoping that you could like download VDB files, and I couldn't quite find that. Maybe you can. Is what a VDB file is. Oh, gotcha. You can't just use OpenVDB. Gotcha. Okay. Yeah, you can Google it. OpenVDB is a good source. For some reason, I didn't notice this yesterday. Sample models. But apparently there's a couple things here. So there's smoke, fire. Let's see, I just downloaded the smoke. Let's see if this works. If I click on file here, can I change it to smoke 2? That's my camera. I don't know where that is now. Let's click on reset. Fit to part maybe? Okay, I'd have to play with that more. And maybe it has to do with the size. Let's see. Let's uncheck this. Fit to part resizes that I see. Yeah, I don't know what's going on. I don't know why that didn't work. I'd have to play with it more. Cool. Any questions on anything?